All right, we're turning to Greece, where the island of Santorini is right now under a state of emergency after a series of earthquakes that started January 31st. Those quakes have ranged in magnitude from 3 to 5.2. 11,000 people have left the island, and experts say the earthquakes could continue for days or weeks. So joining us for more on the reasons behind the quakes is Lindsey Deluce. She's a professor of earth science at the University of Toronto. Good to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me.
So you and I were just looking at these photos, and I was saying you look at the world so differently because what we look at is what a beautiful view of the water. You just see as buildings built on instability.
That's right, yeah.
And we understand these quakes are tectonic plate related, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so what's happening, the Mediterranean is an incredibly tectonically complex region, and what's happening is the northern, the oceanic crust that's attached to Africa is sinking, and as it's sinking, it sort of rolls back, and the Aegean Ocean is stretching to fill the space, and that produces volcanoes like Santorini, and then it also produces cracks in the crust that's stretching. It doesn't stretch smoothly like Play-Doh, right? It breaks. And where those breaks happen, the rocks rub against each other, and sometimes they stick and then slip, and that causes earthquakes.
So really, Santorini is facing a double whammy of both being part of this sort of volcanic arc, I guess they call it.
That's right.
And then also the tectonic plate risk.
Yeah, that's right. The earthquake risk, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
so they've got around, what, 20,000 people that live there, although millions come to visit, and half of those have left. What is the future like for people who want to come back and live? Like, how risky is it to return and live in Santorini?
Yeah. The entire region of the Aegean is always at risk for earthquakes. There's been tons of historical earthquakes. So everybody in that part of the world is always living under some sort of threat. And the challenge with earthquakes is predicting them, specifically when an exact earthquake will happen. So earthquake swarms typically play out over days to weeks. And they can end in two different ways. One is they can just dissipate, and then everybody goes back home.
And what's the other option?
The other option is it can trigger a larger earthquake. It basically, what's probably happening here is there's fluid moving in the crust, and the fluid, water basically goes into little cracks and causes small crackles, these small earthquakes, magnitude 3 up to magnitude 5. But it's possible that it could actually, water could force its way into a larger fault and reduce the friction and actually allow a larger fault that's sort of primed to go. It could trigger it, and it could trigger a larger earthquake.
What are you watching for then as this story continues to unfold?
Looking for the trend in earthquakes. So it ramped up for about a week between the 27th of January and the 3rd of March. And then it's been fairly steady since. And what we'd like to see is that it starts to drop off. So the fluid would basically migrate up out of the rocks and into the ocean and just disappear, and the cause for these earthquakes goes away.
And the sign of that is the decreasing magnitude of the quakes. So that's what you're watching for. Listen, there are a lot of people, I mean, March break is coming. There's a lot of people who love to head to this part of the world for their vacations. What should they keep in mind if they have flights booked in the next few weeks?
To Santorini, well, they need to follow the government warnings. If the government is telling them not to go, they need to not go. Yeah. The danger, if there's a larger earthquake, there's 3 dangers. So the first one is building collapse. So seismologists say that earthquakes don't kill people, buildings do. So it's buildings collapsing. A well-constructed building may survive an earthquake, but it's a risk. So being careful about where you're staying. The second danger is, in a larger earthquake, is that it triggers a tsunami. So this earthquake, if it were to happen, would happen underwater. The faults that are crackling right now are underwater, so it could trigger a tsunami, and tsunamis are extremely dangerous. So you don't want to be near the coastal regions. And then the last thing is, we were talking about it a second ago, but landslides. These are fairly unstable cliffs, and certainly, scientists are monitoring them, and the buildings are well constructed. During an earthquake, things can happen, and so being near the cliffs is a bad idea. So if you're going to Santorini, you're generally going for the coastline or the cliffs, so it's maybe not a good idea to go.
This is what was fascinating to me is when I look at these buildings, these are built right to the edge of those cliffs, and probably the least stable part, I'm going to guess.
Most beautiful, but probably the least stable.
Would you go and stay there now?
Right now, no, I wouldn't. I went there in my 20s, and I only spent a night there because even back then I was concerned about the safety of the cliffs.
Okay, this is good. All good things for us to keep in mind, and also to help us understand what we see happening there now. Lindsey Deluce with the University of Toronto. Great to have you here. Thanks for your eyes on this story.
My pleasure. A lot of fun.
If you liked that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.